Okay, we're back. We're live. This is the SOEST Hour. I'm Jay Fidell, and we talk about the School of Ocean and Earth Science and Technology and things related to that. And with me today is John Sinton. John Sinton is a professor in Geology and Geophysics at SOEST.
Yes.
And his area is volcanology, geochemistry, which is related to volcanology for sure, and petrology, which is about rocks, no?
It is.
Petroglyph, whatnot.
Yes, it's not about petroleum. It's about rocks, about volcanic rocks.
You know, I was going to actually take a flyer and discuss your CV, but we don't have enough time.
Okay. That sounds good.
We'll just say it's a very long CV. It's in academia, it's in industry, it's in government, it's everywhere.
I'm an old guy. I've been at it a long time.
Okay. Let's just go from there.
Okay.
So what does it mean to be these days in Hawaii a volcanologist?
Oh, well, one of the best places to be a volcanologist. I mean, there are many kinds of volcanologists. I approach volcanoes from primarily a geological perspective, trying to understand the relationships between rock types. And then I collect rock samples and try to pull out the secrets that they hold, their age, their chemistry. This tells us a lot about the processes that go on to form these rocks.
So, okay, you're interested in looking back at the kind of the geological history of whatever you look of the Earth. I mean, of everything you touch, and you use these techniques to do that. And I'd like to know more about that. But first question, so the people out there get a handle on this. Why should they care?
Well, there are a variety of reasons. In this case, understanding the geological evolution of the Hawaiian Islands is a pretty useful thing to know. It helps us constrain many of the processes that are involved, trying to figure out why we have volcanoes where we do, which ones are large, which ones are small, which ones emerge above sea level, which ones don't. So these are things that help us better understand the physical framework of the Hawaiian Islands.
Does that mean with these tools, this better understanding that we can predict how the islands are going to change going forward, if not quickly, then slowly?
Certainly, that's the way geology works. We're very good at studying the past, and we use the past to guide our intuition or inform the future on what's likely to happen in the future.
So that includes earthquakes?
It could, and well, it does, and new volcanism and how long it might last and things like that.
Volcanism would be the eruption.
Yeah.
Or semi-eruption. You could have an eruption like this or an eruption like this.
Right.
A little eruption, a big eruption, a bad one, a not so bad one. I mean, most people, you know, it's funny, in Hawaii, most people treat the eruptions of the volcanoes in the Big Island as fun.
Yeah.
It's a tourist attraction.
Yeah.
And the helicopters fly over them, and everybody takes pictures of the glowing embers in the rock.
Yep.
And some tourists decide they got to walk in the rock, which makes a really rough day for them. but you know, I've always been struck with that although there are scientists who take it very seriously, a lot of people treat it as a kind of flora and fauna phenomenon, you know, the local environment. We have to see this. We have to touch this. It's part of the deal, you know.
And one of the things that makes Hawaiian volcanoes really special is that they are relatively benign. They tend to not be very explosive. The lava, for the most part, is approachable. You can see it, you can get close to it.
How close?
Well, it depends. There are different kinds of lava flows, and the ones we call pahoehoe lava, you can get close enough to sample it directly. You can stick a hammer in there and collect the lava directly out of the lava flow.
Should you wear special shoes for this?
You should wear very good shoes and protective clothing and
glasses, I guess.
And cover your eyes and the rest of it.
Because they have little pops.
There are pops, and the
fly.
heat can be very strong too, so
yeah.
You can't get too close.
You know, I remember, this is a little disjointed, but I remember finding that at some point, Kailua slid into the ocean, down from the Pali. It was a huge geological shift, and it like 50 miles out. It was huge. Right? And so I'm thinking to ask you, are we stable now? Could we have a Krakatoa on the Big Island? Could we have another Kailua shift in Oahu? Are these things possible?
So there's a few questions there. We're not going to have a Krakatoa-like eruption in Hawaii. That part we know. The major landslides that have affected this island and many other Hawaiian islands, that is possible, that there could be additional landslides. Whether or not they'll be catastrophic or on a really large scale, or whether they'll be more like the major earthquake we had on the Big Island in 1975 was part of that landsliding event there. But I do want to correct one thing. It didn't really separate away from the poly. The landslide off of Kailua.
I'm so happy because I have no knowledge at all about this.
The landslide that affected the Kailua side of Oahu actually broke away offshore. It was several miles offshore where it broke away. The poly is some sort of erosional remnant that formed later after the landslide. Then erosion was accelerated on land and produced the poly. And we also had a landslide off of Waianae, probably several of them, but there's a huge deposit off of the Waianae side of slump material. So much of Waianae is also missing. And we also have a Waianae poly. The cliffs in the back of Lualualei and Waianae valleys is another poly on the Waianae side.
So years ago, maybe millions of years ago, hundreds of thousands of years ago.
So both of those seem to have formed, well, we're not sure the whole history of these landslides, but at least some of the slumping that took place was late in the volcano's history. So toward the end of when the volcano was active.
Which is?
So for Kailua side, about 2 million, and for Waianae side, about 3 million. And we know there's also a landslide off of Kaena Ridge to the north of Waianae.
So when you say that, there was a bigger island, and that part of the island just went down into the deep?
Basically, but so there can be different ways that it slides. It can be these things we call slumps, which tend to be not a whole series of not very large events, or you can have so-called catastrophic debris avalanches where everything goes at once into big giant rockfall-like debris flows. Those latter ones are the more dangerous. So we haven't seen one of those, fortunately. But the one off of Kailua was definitely a debris avalanche. That one went in a big whoosh.
We could. So, I mean, although it's not likely we'll have a Krakatoa,
no.
We could have a landslide.
So the most likely time for landslides to occur is when the volcano is active or toward the end of its activity.
Relationship.
But after the volcano has, or volcanoes, take Oahu, which have not been active for, well, the main formation of the islands finished about 2 million years ago. So the chances of Oahu having another major landslide are not very high. More likely you'll have them where the volcanoes are active, Maui, Big Island.
Ironically, more likely we'll have them with climate change. It'll disappear under the water.
Well, actually, climate change will play some role because the water levels and how well the volcanoes are lubricated can affect whether or not they're likely to slide.
Lubricated with water.
With water, in this case.
Interesting. Okay, so as a geologist and a volcanologist, what kind of work are you doing these days? What research projects are you involved in? What experiments are you doing?
Well, really two main areas, I guess, right now. I've been working on submarine volcanism along some spreading ridges, in particular along the Galapagos spreading ridge, where
That's
new
off the coast of South America.
Yeah, just north of the
long way from
Galapagos
here.
Islands.
That's why your resume talks about all these trips you took. You do a lot of traveling to these remote locations.
There are good volcanoes and lots of nice places in the world. So that research is ongoing, and we're kind of wrapping up some of that work with a PhD project being done now. Will be defended in a couple weeks on the Galapagos Spreading Center. Then I've been working in Hawaii. Most recently, well, the most recent published work is on the recognition of a new volcano off of Oahu, and we've learned that Oahu is actually composed of 3 major volcanoes, not 2, as we previously thought.
What were the 2?
Well, the 2 are Waianae and Ko'olau. These are the main mountain ranges that make up the island of Oahu, and it had always been thought that those were the only 2 volcanoes that operated to construct the island. We now know that there's actually a 3rd earlier one, and that both Waianae and Ko'olau are built on the flanks of the earlier one.
So where would that be?
It's off to the northwest. I brought some figures. Can we look at them?
Sure. Well, just hold it up to the camera, and that'll be the best thing we can do.
We can do that. Let me do it this way.
Yeah,
maybe
that's
will
good.
work.
That works. Yeah.
And if I have it right side up. And so it's this place called Kaena Ridge. It's up here to the northwest of the island of Oahu. And that's where it turns out that submarine ridge that extends off to the northwest is an earlier volcano, and the island of Oahu was built on the flanks of this earlier.
Does that mean it was bigger than the ones that presented later?
Bigger in terms of we've attempted to calculate volumes for the Kaena volcano and Waianae and Ko'olau. It looks like of the 3, Waianae was probably the largest by maybe 30% larger than either Kaena or Ko'olau. So Waianae was the biggest. The middle one was the biggest.
It's so interesting because, and so now you find out what volcanoes created the island. And I guess they're all different in their own way.
Yep.
No 2 volcanoes are exactly the same, and the geology around them is different, I expect.
Yes, and so that's why we think there really is a 3rd volcano. It's different. It's different in chemistry. It's different in age. It's different in its shape and morphology from Waianae. This submarine ridge that extends off of Oahu had always been thought to just be an extension of the Waianae volcano. And it was really only when we started to get better bathymetric maps of the offshore regions that we realized, this thing just doesn't look right. It's got the wrong shape. It's got these bumps on it. It just doesn't look like a submarine extension of, say, Waianae volcano, as most people thought. And that was really only in the early 2000s or so that we started to have maps that were good enough to where we could look at it and say, boy, something looks fishy out there. No pun intended.
People don't realize, that Hawaii is more than just a pretty place.
There's a lot of Hawaii underwater. There's more underwater than above water. And the reality is we didn't have very good maps until fairly recently.
Yeah.
And we're still filling holes and making those maps. Once we got those, then it looked unusual, and that led us to start going out there, making observations on the bottom, using cameras. And
Yeah, I want to talk about that. I want to talk about exactly how you do this.
okay.
And I also want to talk about how to take a PhD in it and what I have to do to defend myself, such as the experience you're going to be involved in a couple of weeks. That's John M. Sinton, a professor of geology and geophysics in SOEST. His specialty is volcanology, geochemistry, and petrology. And this is ThinkTech Talks, but we're talking about the SOEST show today on a Monday. I'm Jay Fidell. We'll be right back after this short break. I'm Jay Fidell. That's Sharon Moriwaki of the Hawaii Energy Policy Forum. And every Wednesday we have Hawaii, the state of clean energy. We've been doing it for some time now, and we have some fantastic guests on there, unbelievable guests who give us insight into what is going on in a very complex, sometimes very confusing, sometimes very disappointing area of progress in the state. So we love doing this. We love meeting them. We love talking to them. We love having their ideas out on the table. So maybe, just maybe, we can all make some sense of what's going on. Sharon, what do you think?
I think that's absolutely correct. We enjoy ourselves meeting with all these people and hearing about the energy and the state of clean energy, and hopefully we advance clean energy for the state. So it's terrific. Join us. Come
Okay,
join
it's
us.
every Wednesday. Okay, Wednesday is Energy Day. Every
Energy
Wednesday,
Wednesday.
4 to 5 p.m. Hawaii, the state of clean energy, here on ThinkTech Hawaii.
Energy
We'll see you
Wednesday.
there. Okay, we're back. We're live. I'm Jay Fidell here on ThinkTech Talks, and we're doing the SOEST show on Monday, the School of Ocean and Earth Science and Technology. And from that school, we have with us John M. Sinton, who's a professor in geology and geophysics, and he's been telling us about his one of his current projects, showing us some interesting maps. And the important thing is, you know, if we care about the Aina, if we care about the islands, we should have an understanding of how they were created and what's under our feet and their dynamic, their life, so to speak, geologically. It's really interesting and it's important, and I don't think we can turn our backs on this. This is part of our understanding of the land. Yeah. Anyway, you have some more maps to show us. I'd also like to know how you got those maps.
Well, I'll show you this one. This is a view of the Oahu region. Let's see if I can get it straightened up. Here we go. And what we see is that extending way off to the northwest part of the island of Oahu is a large bank of shallow ridge. And we've known about this since the Navy started making bathymetric maps around the Hawaiian Islands for 40 or 50 years. But the resolution was so low that we couldn't really pick out many of the fine features of them. And so it was only when we got, one of the things that really accelerated our ability to map was when the University of Hawaii got the Kilo Moana research vessel. Has a very good mapping system on it. And so using the University of Hawaii's ship, we were able to fill in a lot of gaps and get higher resolution maps than we ever had before.
So is this the same ship that has been used to do the project to find the mustard gas south of Oahu at the ocean bottom?
Yes, I think they've used the Kilo Moana. That work can be done on a variety of vessels. They don't necessarily need a really large ocean-going class
This
vessel.
is a large ocean-going.
Some of this was, for example, when we went out there to dredge, we need not every ship can dredge rocks off the bottom. And also not every ship is equipped with the bathymetric mapping systems that the Kilo Moana has.
So let me try to define terms so that people, including me, will know. Bathymetric, what is that?
It really is just the topography under the water.
Okay.
So we say bathymetry instead of, you can still say topography, it's okay, but we're talking about the depth of the land masses.
Okay, and these maps, this one,
Yep.
for example, I mean, it's fascinating. That's Oahu, and you said there was a shelf indicated by this foggy area.
Yep.
And I guess the landmass over the water now is
Green.
and this is how was this created with that ship and with readings from the bottom? How did you do that?
Yeah, it's really made with sonar. Sonar is the best way to map in the oceans. Sonar is just using sound in the same way that you would use light above water. You have a sound source. It bounces off of the bottom. You can calibrate the speed of sound in water so you can figure out how far away something is by its return, how long it takes to come back. And by doing using sonar systems, we can build topographic maps beneath the water.
But how did that system outline the green area above the water?
Oh, I made the maps using some software, commercial software that's available. Once you have the data, you can render it in various ways, and I'm using, this particular image was made using a commercial software called Fledermaus. It just takes the
opera.
data. Yeah, I like the opera. It's a commercial software.
Okay, so you can get data to say where the green area is already. You can't take a ship on there.
Well, we have this. These
But
are.
you have the
shape
boundaries of it.
of Oahu. This is. We know the topography of Oahu pretty well from lots of mapping that goes back a long time.
And this would be a representation of Oahu today,
Yep.
not before any other events happen, but right now.
No. These are data for today, both above water and below water, that are used to make these images.
And these various layers of shelf around Oahu, that was determined by the ship and using sonar. And you have software that will stitch it together.
That's right.
So you can make a map this big. This must be, what, a couple of 100 miles across?
Yep, that's right. From Kaena Point out to the end of this ridge is something like about 50 miles. So it extends, it's almost as far toward Kauai as the island is long. So we've known for a while that Oahu was twice as long as the part that sits above water. What we didn't know was how it came to be and how many volcanoes there were that built the island.
Yeah, and think of how many condominiums you could build just on that 50 miles. Wow,
And
that'd
it's
be really
nice and
something.
flat.
Anyway, it looks like, maybe it's a question of how it looks like land, the way this representation comes out. It looks like there's a kind of a cliff where it drops off into the blue.
Yeah.
So that'd be a steep decline around the edge of that.
That scarp on the south side is another one of these landslide headwalls. And so there's a lot of debris out here that all slumped away on the south side. So those steep cliffs are in fact the part of the landslide scars.
Okay, now you say this is part of a PhD
No, not this one.
Okay, this is part of your basic research ongoing right now.
Yeah, this research was done with a lot of collaborators. It actually started with undergraduate students. Once we recognized that there was something really interesting out on Kaena Ridge, a faculty colleague of mine, Professor Fred Dunnebeer, he was teaching geophysics and I was teaching a Hawaiian geology class, and we decided to join forces and we convinced the dean of SOEST to give us some ship time and take these students out to Kaena Ridge and begin our investigations of it. We had a series of lectures, we did field trips to Waianae, we kind of set up the whole problem. What is Kaena Ridge? Is it part of Waianae or is it something different? And then with those students, we went out to sea for about 4 days. We collected rocks by dredging, we collected measurements of the gravity field over the ridge, then the magnetics, and then the students worked on these samples and data for a while. That was the first work done on Kaena specifically.
Okay, let me go back for a minute. You collected rocks.
Yep.
That means you had equipment to get down to the bottom of things at the bottom of the ocean.
Yes.
Did you use the bathysphere for that? I know that university has 2 of them.
Yeah, we have the Pisces submersibles. I'd love to come out here with Pisces. Pisces has not had dives on Kaena Ridge, but it would be a wonderful tool for investigating the bottom. Pisces can go to part of Kaena Ridge, but it can't go to the deeper parts. They have depth limitations on those spheres.
What is that roughly?
It's about, I think it's 1,200 meters. And this is too deep down on the edge.
When you look at this picture again, referring to the picture again, It shows a very steep drop-off.
Yeah.
So that would be too deep for Pisces to get down.
The edges are, but the shallower parts could be reached by Pisces.
And the interesting thing about Pisces is that they're manned vehicles,
Yes,
so you don't want to fool around.
that's right. And you're not going to exceed the depth limits of those.
Yeah, yeah.
No,
So
when
you
we
go
went
down
out in
with Pisces.
2006, though, the
Yeah.
first cruise, we used the Kilo Moana and we dredged. And that's all done from the surface. It's basically a big bucket. You throw it over the side. It's on a strong winch wire and a big steel frame with a chain bag on it, and you drag it on the bottom and collect rocks with it. And then that is pulled back up to the deck, and you empty it out and see what you got.
But you have to make really close record keeping on exactly where you got it from. Yeah.
That's right. You do the best you can. You know where the ship is very well, but where the dredge is
Navigation.
on the bottom, you don't know as well.
So then you drag it on the bottom, or you take Pisces, whatever the case may be, and now you have samples, and you put you in the data file that you're recording the nature of these samples. You're able to say pretty much where you got it from.
We know where the rocks came from. Then there's interpretation that goes into these rocks. What do they look like? Do we think this lava is it volcanic or sedimentary? Was it erupted in deep water or shallow water? You can tell some of those things from the little gas bubbles that are in it, and whether or not it looks like it chilled against water and made glass.
So now that you have the rocks from whatever methodology, how do you actually examine them and determine their makeup and their texture and so forth?
There are various ways, but one of them, we can cut slices of the rocks and look at them with a microscope. So they get mounted up on glass slides and turn them into microscope slides. So there's a industry in making and looking at rocks in thin section, it's called, in microscope slides.
It's talking about paper thin enough to have light come through it in a microscope.
That's right. Needs to transmit the light through it. We also do chemical analyses, and so we kind of break the rock up and try to remove any kinds of alteration or weathering parts that are stuck on the outside, get the most pristine part from the interior. And we can analyze these. We have a large variety of analytical instruments in SOEST that we can use.
This is back home. You take them back to SOEST.
Back in the
You
lab.
lay them out on a big table.
Yeah.
And you start to analyze them. So what kind, make me a student. I'm really interested in how you analyze the material in the rock and the texture of the rock.
Well, the study that for the Cayena Ridge material, we did, let's see, 4 main techniques that we applied. We picked off little bits of glass. It's like obsidian glass on the outside of some samples, and those
Obsidian means it was
glassy.
superheated by the volcano.
It means it cooled very quickly. It chilled.
Okay.
So the lava, this only happens for the submarine lavas. When they're chilled against seawater, you get a little rind of glass because the lava chills against seawater, and it cools so quickly that it doesn't crystallize. Instead, it just chills, quenches.
Mm-hmm.
Glass is quenched liquid that quenches fast enough that crystals don't form in it. But it will be homogeneous, and so we can analyze it with small spots. And the glasses were analyzed with what's called an electron microprobe, or an electron probe microanalyzer.
Mm-hmm.
But this, we can analyze some elements using the microprobe. And the advantage there is we can do a lot fairly quickly, but we can only analyze for certain elements because of the instrumentation is not capable of measuring elements that are in abundances less than about 1/10 of a weight percent.
So what kind of elements do you find in these rocks?
Well, they're very similar to those of on-land Hawaiian basalts. They're almost exclusively basaltic lavas, which means they have about 50% silicon dioxide, a fair amount of iron and calcium and magnesium. some sodium and potassium and aluminum.
Basaltic is that combination?
Yes, basaltic lavas. Basalt is the typical lava that makes up the Hawaiian Islands, and that composition of about 50% silica is pretty characteristic of it.
So it's not a question of Lapa Hoi Hoi or what's the other one?
Lava? No, now we're talking about the chemical composition of the lavas rather than their form that eventuates
down to the
from
molecule.
how they flow. Yeah. Then we also use what's called X-ray fluorescence spectrometry. This is using X-rays of characteristic radiation. We can analyze about 20 elements with that. We can analyze the isotopic composition, the individual nuclides of individual elements, and that's done using what are called mass spectrometers. It measures the mass rather than the chemical characteristics. And then finally, we got some ages. We dated the rocks to figure out when they formed.
How do you do that?
These are done with radiometric decay clocks. We use the potassium-argon system. You know that potassium is radioactive and will decay to argon at a known rate. And if you measure how much is in the rock, you can figure out how long it's been decaying.
The potassium or the argon? Or
You
both?
measure both. You have to measure both.
Oh, I see. So then you compare.
And you actually measure individual nuclides of potassium and argon, 39 and 40, for example, atomic masses of these elements.
What kind of device do you have to have?
It's a mass spectrometer again. It'll measure mass, but it's a gas mass spectrometer. So you take the sample and then you have to get the gas out of the rock. You can do that by crushing or melting usually, and then measure the gas.
Okay.
The other thing I was going to tell you is that although we dredged initially, we went back several times, and the last work was done using remotely operated vehicles, ROVs. And we used the Jason ROV on Cayena Ridge on about 3 or 4 different cruises, last one in 2011.
These are more modern than the Pisces. Pisces are not new machines. Yeah?
Well, the Pisces are human-occupied vehicles, so they're submarines. But the ROV has nobody in it. It's remotely operated, but it's tethered. So you have a cable from the ship to the vehicle.
And that's for navigation.
And well, that cable is your power and your video feeds. So you can, the ROV has cameras on it, so you can see the bottom and see, you can choose your samples.
Which
And
do you
then the
prefer?
ROV has these claws on it that can reach out and collect a rock and put it in the basket. And you can take a picture of this whole operation. So it's much more precise sampling than the dredging, because you
Oh,
down
sure,
there you
because
can
he's just
see.
dragging anything that gets in the hopper.
That's right. You can see where individual rocks come from, and you might, at the end of a dive, you might have 15 different rocks, but you know their relationship to each other rather than have them all mixed up in a bag.
Well, that's the next question to ask, which we'll take a short break, but when we come back, I'd like to ask that. Exactly what do you do now that you got all this data about all these rocks? How do you enter it presumably in a database, and how do you interpret the database to give you useful conclusions? That's John Sinton. He's a professor of geology and geophysics, and his specialty is volcanology and geochemistry and petrology, about rocks. We're on the SOEST show. I'm Jay Fidell in ThinkTech Talks. We'll be right back after this short break.
Hello, I'm Martin Despang, and I'm the host together with the one and only Ali Yamashita, and our show is called Urban Transcendence. And Urban Transcendence is about identifying where we have a unique situation of a vibrant city in one of the most beautiful natural environments. So how these two can coincide, sometimes conflict, how they could find reciprocity in the 21st century is what we're excited about. And we're planning on bringing in a diverse body of guests, both from the arts and the science and the established and the wise and the emerging generation. So hope you will join us. We'll always be on Thursdays from 1 to 2 p.m.
Okay, we're back. We're live. We're here with John Sinton. He's a professor of geology and geophysics in, guess what, SOEST, the School of Ocean and Earth Science and Technology. I get that right? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Now we have these rocks, and they're all presumably on a table, and they're maybe in bags after you've processed them, and they're all cataloged in some way. What happens?
Well, we, from Cayena Ridge on this project over the years, we have about 100 new samples that we took, which is not really enough, but it's a good start.
How big is a sample?
Oh, it varies. Some of them are huge. We don't need that much. Some of them are very small and frustrating to work on the small ones, but we kind of sort through and figure out which ones will be best for the different kinds of studies we do. Some of them, if a rock's been sitting exposed to seawater for 3 million years, a lot of bad things happen to it. And,
You mean to the original chemical composition?
yeah, the chemistry can be changed, and eventually it'll turn to soil effectively. So we're trying to get the freshest material. So we sort through them and choose which ones we want to do additional work on.
How can you tell a good sample from a not so good
Well,
sample?
you can smack it with a hammer. If it rings, it's a good one.
It's very subjective.
But we
isn't it?
saw them. We saw them. We have rock saws, and we look inside. We
See
make
the
those
texture.
microscope slides to
Yeah.
see at the micro scale whether it's altered or not, and we can choose. That's why you go to school for
I guess so.
15 years
It's like
or
being
so.
a radiologist.
Yeah, you learn how to do these things and how to recognize the good from the bad, if you will. Good, of course, being what we're interested in as opposed to
Yeah, well, useful.
other people.
Yeah.
And we choose certain ones that we think will be good for dating, for example, or good for various kinds
Dating,
of...
did you say? Is that like
Yeah.
the pet rock?
Yeah, something like that, for getting the age of the rock.
Oh, so
And the
so you're not
chemistry.
sure you're going to do every rock. You're not going to test every rock
we
the
don't.
same way.
No, we only produced about 4 new ages on our project. There was some earlier work had been done that had some ages out in this region. We selected about 40, I think it was about 45 samples to do some kind of special higher resolution geochemical work, because that is time consuming and somewhat expensive, and so you kind of pick and choose. I think we did about 20 samples for the isotopic measurements. So you kind of sort it. It's a nested approach
Okay.
that
So,
you take.
and you're writing it all down somewhere in a
of
database,
course.
what have you.
Sure.
So now you have the database, and you have all the measurements you've taken on identified rock samples, because they all have numbers, presumably, and something about origin and all that.
Yeah.
Okay, so what do you do with the database to interpret it and come to conclusions, scientific conclusions of one kind or another?
Well, this is a fairly complicated process, and this again is something that requires training. This is some of the techniques on how to interpret geochemical data of volcanic rocks is what we teach in our programs, in our undergraduate and graduate programs at the university. Not anybody could do it, that is to say, without the training. On how to interpret. What does it mean if iron is 2% different in one rock than another? Things like this. And so we go through all these data and try to figure out how this volcano was evolving, how much melting was going on that was feeding the volcano, what was the temperature of the lava when it erupted, what minerals did it contain in it. This tells us really what I do is learn a lot more about the pre-eruptive processes in the magma inside the volcano before the eruption. I'm more interested in this, what we might call magma evolution and volcanic evolution than in the actual eruptive process.
Can you tell that from the tests?
Yes.
You can tell the history of the specimen,
Yep.
not just the current composition of it.
And then we put all this back together again, and we learn, for example, that as this Cayena volcano was growing, in its early stages, it produced a particular rock type. And then later on, and by that I mean maybe approaching 1 million years later on, it was still having frequent eruptions, but the chemistry began to change. And that was telling us that the melting processes and the storage in the volcano was changing from the early days. We found that eventually the volcano emerged above sea level, and so we know that this was once a subaerial volcano out there. West of Waianae, there was a subaerial volcano.
So what does that mean, under the water?
No, up in air, above water.
Oh.
So that this was, Oahu once had 3 different big mountain ranges on it, Cayena, Waianae, and Ko'olau. Now we only see 2 of them. But we can tell from the study of these rocks that some of them were erupted in air, not in water. So the volcano must have been emergent at that time. And then if we can get a date on that rock, if we can figure out its age, we'll know exactly when that happened.
So you can actually figure out the dynamics of the way the island was built.
Yeah, it's
what
all
came
about
up,
evolution.
how it came up, looking at all these factors.
That's right.
And it must have been very interesting when the Ko'olaus came up, because they are a spectacular set of mountains.
They are now, primarily because of erosion. Ko'olau is far more eroded than Waianae, as it turns out, even though it's younger. And there are a couple of reasons why that's so, but much of what you think of, I think what most people think about the Ko'olau, is really a product of the erosion that's taken place there. It'd be a very different looking thing when it was an active volcano.
Why is that? It faces north?
Why is it more eroded? A couple of reasons. One is Ko'olau many Hawaiian volcanoes evolve in their late stages. They develop kind of a cap or a carapace of really massive lavas that are resistant to erosion. But Ko'olau never did that. It died when it was a younger volcano, and it never got this protective cap. And so it's much more, it erodes much more easily than, say, Waianae volcano. It's also on the windward side of the island, so it has higher rainfall.
Sounds like teeth, caps on teeth.
Caps, well, you get a cap on the top
holds
of the
things
volcano.
together. Yeah.
Like Mauna Kea has this cap on it now,
Yeah.
and this cap is resistant to erosion.
Yeah.
But Ko'olau never had that.
Yeah. And you can see this at a distance. You don't have to get up close to it, right?
You can look at Waianae and you look at Ko'olau, they're very different looking.
Yeah.
The cap on Waianae is, for example, at Mount Ka'ala. You might ask yourself, why is the highest point on Oahu on the older volcano, not on the younger one? And part of that reason is that Waianae is less eroded than Ko'olau. It has this cap on top of it, which resists erosion. Also, Ko'olau is on the wet side of the island, so rainfall is the main culprit for erosion, landsliding and just stream erosion. And so it's pretty chewed up. And then the other big event, of course, that affected Ko'olau was the offshore landslide. Although the landslide was offshore, once you broke away the flanks of it, it made that side of the island very unstable and very susceptible to erosion, mainly by stream erosion, which is what ultimately cut the poly.
So you can understand the topography. You can understand the chemistry in the soil, I think, from making these studies. You can understand historically what happened and maybe what will happen to some extent going forward. But does this help us understand the nature of the soil, the composition of the soil, say for agriculture? If you begin with the idea that it all came from volcanoes, but somehow some of it got to be arable soil. That process, is that within volcanology? Is it within geochemistry and petrology?
Well, there are geochemical and petrological approaches that can that are relevant to things like soil development and agriculture. It's not what I do.
I just wanted to find out.
And this study that we were talking about really has, it's a long stretch from there to what we can grow and why.
But conceivably, it's the other end of the spectrum. Yeah.
It is. It's kind of the end product
Yeah.
of the weathering and alteration process. I told you we would take a rock and we'd try to eliminate all that stuff for our studies, but somebody who is more interested in agricultural potential of a rock, for example, they might be very interested in all that stuff we throw away or discard, or, well, we never throw anything away, but put it in a separate bag.
Well, you know, it sounds like a lot of this research is heavily involves the students. I don't know if it's graduate students or undergraduate students, but they help you with the measurements. They help you with assembling the materials and cataloging the materials and analyzing the materials, making the maps and so forth.
That's right.
Including, was it this or it was another project? But you said in a couple of weeks' time you have a PhD defense. We have only a couple of minutes left, but I'd be very curious because I'm always empathetic with a PhD that is about to undergo a defense. You know?
Well, this student will be defending her dissertation in a couple of weeks. She's been working for a little over 4 years on this project. We collected rock samples using submarines in the Galapagos. She initially was...
You were there.
Oh, yes. Yeah, we had a big expedition out there, and we conducted the field work and collected all the samples.
The expedition started in Hawaii.
Only in the sense that the idea and the work to get it funded, but we all flew down to Galapagos Islands and got on the ship there and then sailed from there, collected the rocks, and this student made the maps. She put together an eruptive history for 2 different places where we had dives and observations, trying to figure out how many lava flows there were and when and their sequence. And then she's been studying the petrology of these rock samples ever since by various techniques. She's got one paper published, another one submitted, and has written another one that is being reviewed by her committee now and is not yet submitted for publication, but this will constitute her dissertation.
Well, I know that a thesis and a dissertation are not the same, but does a dissertation involve finding a hypothesis and then doing research and analyzing the results of the research to see whether your hypothesis is correct?
Dissertations in our department all are science. And so the scientific method very much is designed around the formation of hypotheses and then testing those hypotheses. And as you work through, so that particular project was looking at how differences in the supply of new magma in 2 different places along the ridge affects volcanic eruptions and the pre-eruptive magma processes that take place. And so we had that basic question that was being addressed. We had some ideas, hypotheses if you like, about how they would be different, but we went out to investigate these and to test those ideas. And as you collect a little data, you say, why are they different? It could be this, could be that. You ask new questions. You ask yourself, what kinds of data do I need to answer that question? And then you go out and try and collect those data. And then sometimes when you think you have it together, you say, what you try to ask the question, will this hold up to scrutiny? What other, can I test it? Can I test my ideas and see whether they really hold up to be true? That's the scientific method, and that's what we apply, but we apply it to rocks.
Well, you know, but you know, in the show before we were talking with IFA, you met him, Roy Gal, and it's similar in terms of this. Seems to me, I'm just a non-scientist trying to touch science. That you don't know what happened millions of years ago. You don't know, and you can't make any snap judgments about that. That's the last thing you want to do.
Well, in the case of the Hawaiian problem, we had this ridge off of Oahu, and we asked ourselves the question, is this part of Waianae, or is it a separate volcano? That's the fundamental question. And then the next question is, how do you tell? Does it have the same chemistry? Does it have the same age? Does it have the same structure? Is part of the magma system from Waianae leaking out at Kaena Ridge, or does it require a whole different volcano? You ask yourself, how do you define a Hawaiian volcano? What makes them distinct? Why is Mauna Kea so different from Mauna Loa? Why is Mauna Loa different from Kilauea? We can tell volcanoes apart, and we try to apply that to ones that are 3 and 4 million years. And after collecting the data, asking the right questions, and collecting what we hope to be the right data, we can come back and say, yeah, it's something else.
With a certain degree of confidence, and by making that conclusion, confirming that hypothesis, then you're advancing the science.
We've advanced the science, and we've left ourselves open to the next round of questions. How can we test this? Can we show it to be true? And if you look at something the size of the offshore regions of Hawaii and how poorly sampled there's more to be learned.
So it's a long way to go.
We got a long way to go. And will these, what we think right now, hold up? I don't know, but almost certainly we'll learn something new and there'll be changes.
What excitement. Excitement at SOEST. Maybe I should change the title of the
There
show.
you go.
John Sinton is a professor of geology and geophysics in volcanology, geochemistry, and petrology at SOEST, the School of Ocean and Earth Science and Technology. I'm Jay Fidell. This has been the SOEST Hour, Excitement at SOEST. Thank you so much, John.
Thanks, Jay.
Aloha.
Thank you.